Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be teaching you how you can make this type of particle system effect. So if you're curious, this one was done for my mech asset for my RTS project, and as you can see, it's basically a Muzzlefire with a smoke in the background. So let me show you how you can make this from scratch, and I'm going to be trying to replicate the same effect that I got using actually resources you can grab on the internet. So this should be applied for everyone. So let me go to a new scene and let's start it from scratch. What is the first step when you want to do a particle effect? The first step should be to have some reference. So let's go ahead and on YouTube, just type muzzle flash effect and you're pretty much going to see a muzzle flash, how it looks like. And the important part here is for you to pause the video and let's use the dot and the comma keys to move this video frame by frame until we see how it's actually being produced. So as you can see, the first step is for you to generate a muzzle flash effect, and this is going to be a simple sprite inside on our project. Then later we're going to use other sprites to create this kind of smoke effects. And because I want to keep this simple, we're not going to use a full smoke simulation. We're going to create some blobs of smoke that once we create enough of them, they're going to give the effect that you see right here. So, all right, this is our reference. Now let's talk about grabbing resources to be able to replicate this effect inside of Godot. So you're going to need textures as well. So as always, I like to use free textures for you to be able to see how this works. So here on opengameart.org, as you can see, these mostly are free textures. So just enter the textures category here and let's type here for particle. And as you can see, this is the one we want. This is a particle pack by Kenny. So go ahead and just download this. And I don't know if I can grab here. And as you can see, we have here some Muzzlefire effects and we also have some smoke effects, which we are going to use to build our fire effects. So go ahead and download this and support Kenny if you want. So after you have downloaded the images, you're going to open them inside of your image editing software, which can be Photoshop or in this case, which is the one I'm using, which is GIMP 2.10.28. So let's go ahead and let's work on this. So let's work first on creating the textures for the Muzzlefire effects. So after we have opened GIMP, let me grab here some of those Muzzlefire effects and let's drop them inside of GIMP so we can port them as layers. So this is very simple. We are going to set the size of the image by 1024 and we're going to align all these Muzzlefire effects in a grid-like. So we basically are creating a sprite sheet here. So let's do the following. Now let's merge everything and I'm going to simply remove the background color to create a transparent image. So let's go ahead to layer, transparency, and there's color to alpha. And here we're going to pass black as the color we want, so we can only have the Muzzlefire effects in a transparent way. And I'm going to be using this to create our particle system. And for the next one, we're going to be grabbing some smoke elements. So let me see here what I think it could be considered as smoke. So I'm going to grab a few of the ones that I think it looks nice. I'm going to be working with 4 again, just so we can speed up this tutorial, because you can make this sprite sheet as big as you want and with how many variations as you want, and you can also work on them. So same way, let's just align them. I'm going to repeat the same steps. Let's merge them and let's go to layer, transparency, and the color to alpha, and let's set black as it. So now we should have 2 texture packs that we're going to use it. So let's export this inside our Godot project. So as you are exporting this as a PNG to your project, one of the things you want to do, because this is basically a black and white image with a alpha texture, with alpha channel, you want to set it up to be using a black and white, and we also need the alpha. So you're going to export both of them as a 8 bits gray and alpha texture, and this should be good to go. And you're going to do the same with the smoke one. Now, once we are inside of Godot once again, under our images, you should be able to see, and because I'm doing this inside my RTS project, there's a lot of stuff here. But the effects that we have exported are right here, which is the muzzle smoke effect and the muzzle flash effect. So let's go ahead and start working on this. Let's go ahead and create a GPU particle node, which is basically what we are going to be working on. So right off the bat, let's create a draw pass. So basically we're going to be creating a mesh so we can actually start seeing stuff. And let's start with a basically quad mesh. And let's go ahead and let's apply a basic material. So let's add a new standard material to this. So let's go ahead and let's go to our albedo and let's drop in our smoke effect. And as you can see, there we go. We have our smoke. Let's enable transparency. And now we should be starting to see what we're going to be working with. So let's go ahead and start working on this. So one of the things is we want to disable the shading mode. We want this to be unshaded. Diffuse mode, let's put to tune, and we do not want any specular, which basically is going to be standard for this type of material. We also want to disable ambient lights and fog influence. Another thing we are going to be doing is let's go ahead to our particles thing and let's start working on its processing material. So let's create a new particle processing material. And there we go. We have started working on particles, the standard Godot approach to it. So let's go right ahead on velocity. And at first I want to access gravity. So I believe it's under accelerations. And let's eliminate gravity from this. We do not want gravity. Under velocity, let's enable here. And let me put something like 10 and maybe 5 to start with. So we have a minimal initial velocity of 5 and a maximum of 10. Another thing that's quite important, we want this particle to be emitting towards the front, which is -z. So I believe we can go right ahead under direction and type -1 here. And there we go. Now we are emitting particles under the front side of Godot, which is -z on the axis, which should be in line with your model. Another thing we're going to be working is to enable the billboard effect. So I believe this is under our materials tab, not under our processing particles. And here we go. We have billboard. And because we are using particles, you want to use particle billboard. And this also is going to allow us to use another effect I'm going to show you. So as you can see, now particles are aligned towards the screen. So once we have that, we want to go right ahead under the particle processing material once again. And let's see if I can find the part where it talks about offsets. So I believe it's under display and animation. And here on offset max, you're going to see this is the maximum animation offsets that correspond to the frame index. You're going to put 1 here. And we also have to set it up here on the particle animations that this is a sprite sheet with 4 textures. So let's put here 2 by 2. This corresponds to 2 horizontal frame images and 2 vertical frame images. And as you can see, now we have a animation. And because we are using the offset, you're going to see it's going to randomize the frames here. And if you want it, you can also animate the speed, which basically is going to be animating the speed of the particles. And as you can see, it's going to keep changing it, which in this case we don't want. So it's going to stay just like this. Now let's go back here and let's continue working on this. So right off the bat, one of the things I want to work on is on the spawn position, which its emission is all right. Let's work on angles. It's also all right. Now here on velocity, let's work on a few things. I believe the spread is too much. So let's put 25. And for reference of size, you want to grab your 3D asset that you're building this so you can have a comparison with size. So just for size approach, let me place there the asset I was building this particle for. And I'm going right ahead back to scale. Now the scale you can also set here, but you can also set under the pass. So on the draw passes, which is basically the 3D mesh that's going to be used on this particle system, you can also increase it right here. And I believe for this asset, something like the scale of 3 should be all right. All right, now let's go ahead under display and let's start working on color curves. So I don't like the opacity of this. I'm going to basically reduce this a lot. So let's put this a little bit downwards. And you're going to see that it's not respecting. So the color we're setting here is not working. And as you see here, I don't know if here mentions it, you have to set on your material of the geometry that you're going to be using the particle system to modulate its color. And for you to do that, you're going to go right ahead here on, I believe it's on albedo, and it's on vertex color. And you're going to use as albedo. So the vertex color is being used by the particle system to modulate the colors of the particles. And when you enable this under the material category, you also enable it to grab the color you are placing here under your particle system. And this also is going to allow you to do things like hue variation for your particle system. So cool effects like this, you're going to use the vertex color. So let's go right ahead, make this unsaturated, and let's regulate here something like, it's going to be pretty low, because as you saw in the reference, the smoke is fairly light. All right, I'm happy with that. What I'm not happy about is the size of this particle. I think I want it to be a lot bigger. So let's find here the draw pass. So there we go. And let me increase the size of this mesh to something like, I think 5 is going to be all right. Now let's do something very important for this effect, which is animating the opacity from the start of the emission to the end. And this is pretty easy to do. I think I'm going to use the alpha curve for this. So let's go right ahead, create a new texture, and let's create a new curve. Let's enter the curve editing, and let's work on this. So I just want to create a point in the middle and a point in the back. And doing it this way, once the particle is born, it's going to be born at 0 opacity. It's going to go under middle and maximum opacity. Then later it's going to die out. And this is what it looks like, which is pretty cool. Now something I think is going to look nicer is if we randomize the angle of the particle. So under spawn, let's go towards angle and let's do something like 360 and minus 360. So this is not an animation. This is basically the starting position of the particle is going to be rotated through these values. So this is not a rotation animation. This is a starting angle position. So with this, I think this is pretty good. Now, something I also want to change here is regarding a little bit of animated velocity. Because as you can see, it's a bit flat. Let's add some dampening. And let me see if I can find that. Accelerations, here it is on damping. Let's put as minimum 1 and something around 3 on dampening. And there we go. We also can go ahead and enable one of the particle flags. So under the particle flags here, let's enable damping as friction. So this also has some effect here on the particle system. Also something you might want to disable, I don't know if this improves performance or not, because I have not used any attractors, but we don't need to use attractor iterations, so let's just turn this off. Also something you should want to do is to animate some type of accelerations under your particles, so it looks a bit nicer. So let's put here something like -1 and 1 or 2. So this adds some nice effects. So if we extrapolate this, you can see the effect it has. So let me put something absurd like 55. You're going to see it speeds up particles, but it also can start the particle at a fairly negative number and basically stops the particle dead in the air. So all of this is just to add some randomization. So let's put to 1 and 3. I think this looks all right. Now, something also quite interesting that we can actually see from the reference is that, as you can see here on the reference, the smoke effect does not start all that big because it belongs also to the muzzle flash effect. So if I go back here to the first few frames that start this effect on this reference, the first step, you don't see actually a lot of smoke. Then there happens the muzzle flare effect. And then later you kind of see the smoke growing, so the gases of the fire weapon. So on this case, what we're going to do is simply animate the scale to replicate the same kind of effect. So let's go ahead and let's go to scale. And here under scale curve, let's create a new curve. And let's also add here a new curve. So here you kind of want to test this a lot. So I think I'm going to be placing 2 points, and one's going to be right on top and one right up there. So something like this, I believe I'm going to use. So the smoke kind of starts a little bit smaller, then it rapidly grows up and it kind of fades in. So there we go. Now you're going to notice you're not seeing any effect on the particle system. And I think that is because I did not turn up one of the properties. So here on the particle billboard effect under your material, you're going to see something like keep scale. And this is basically what is required for you to be able to animate it. So as you can see now, the particle system is respecting our curved layer here. As you can see, if I extrapolate the effect to see what is happening, and it's now working. So there's some things you have to keep in mind. Like if you don't turn this on, the particle is not going to respect it. So be mindful of those things. I believe I read this somewhere here. It says that it needs that enabled, but I don't remember where I saw it. So let's go put this back where it belongs. And here you want to experiment and see what kind of effect you want to build. And I think that for me, this looks all right. So another thing for us to be concerned is the amount of particles we are emitting. In this case, the less, the better because of performance. If you notice, the performance here at the moment is at 600 FPS, which is fairly high. But let's say if you have 100 units, that's spawning 8 particles, that's going to be 800 particles, and you're going to see that performance quickly drops out. So remember that in the case of my RTS project, I'm going to want to keep performance as best as I can, so I'm going to have fewer particles. So something around 5 is what I used for that project. Also, something you want to keep in mind is the starting point of the emission. I'm going to be placing it a little back. Right under here, I think is the right. Now, I think that for this specific case, the color is still a bit high, too strong. So for this specific asset, let's go ahead and under the material here, and let's go towards its albedo, and let's reduce the opacity of this. You can also reduce the opacity here on the material or inside the particle. So let's try the particle. I think it's going to be the best way. So this is going to be under display color curves. Let's put something like 10, and I think that's all right. Also, something you want to keep in mind is the time of your particle. So this should be relatively straightforward, but the fire rate of your weapon is going to depend also on the emission of your particles. So be mindful of that. So I'm going to adjust this after we have built the Muzzlefire effect. So as you can see, as it is right now, it basically emits the effect we wanted. So let's go right ahead, and now let's create another GPU particle effect that's going to be taking care of our muzzle flash effects. So let me go ahead, and for this specific asset, I'm not going to use any custom geometry. So for my current weapon effect, I'm using a custom mesh for the particle emitters. Here, I'm going to use everything that Godot has. So I'm going to be using 2 draw passes here. So let us start by creating 2 quad meshes here. And this will become apparent once we start working on it. So let's add 2 quad meshes, and let me create a new processing material so we can start working on it. And also let's give it a new standard shader. All right, now let's go ahead. I'm going to hide the smoke effect so I can see this. And we are not seeing any of that because I believe there's something with the facing of it. So let's go ahead and let's go under our material. And one of the things we want to do is disable the culling mode so you can see both sides of the particle. And as you can see, once we've done that, that works. So the culling mode basically does not display the front or back faces of your particles. So this can actually improve performance as well. But we want to disable this because this is not going to follow a billboard effect and we want to see it on the screen. So let's do with the particle processing almost the same thing. We do not want to have gravity, so let's disable gravity. And let's add here some texture so you can see what we are doing. So let's go under albedo. And let me grab my images. So this is going to be the muzzle flash effect 001. Let's drop right there. And there we go. Let's go to our transparency. Let's enable alpha. And let's add a add mode for this, because this is a Muzzlefire effect. We want to client to have this glow effect. Next, let's disable the shading mode. Let's put it to tune, disable the specular, disable everything we can. Let's, as the other particles, use the albedo as vertex color, and I'm mostly going to use the same things here. And that should take care of it. Now let's go ahead and let's emit only one particle. So we are emitting only one particle per time here. And here is something you want to do. Let's put 0.5 and let's pre-process this like something like 99 or something. So this is going to have a fairly short life. Oh, my bad, it's not. That is the one that I want. And you're going to see the effect that this have. Now, something that I'm going to be doing by the end of this is using this particle effect with the billboard effect. But the thing is, the billboard shader here built with the standard inside of Godot, once you enable particle billboards to use, you're going to notice that it does not allow you to stay on place. So the way that I did with my current mesh here, to have the billboard effect of changing particles. So if I go back here to my material or my particle, and if we go towards display and animation, and just as the same way animate it, and on the material side of things, we need to specify that we have 2x2 particles. So for you to have this animation of switching frames, Godot does not allow you to disable the billboard effect. Like, we kind of needed just a particle once to have the animations without the billboard effects. The way that I did with my current one was to convert the shader to grab the piece of code that did that. So we're going to do that by the end of this. So let's just continue the effect here. And I'm going to apply some color towards it. And as you can see, this is pretty much the whole gist of the muzzle flash effect. Now, of course, as I have talked about, the emission speed is going to determine the fire rate of your weapon. So if you want a faster firing rate, you're going to basically reduce the lifetime, and you're also going to change the interpret to end. So change this as you want. Just keep in mind that you want to emit one particle per time. I believe 0.1 is all right for my case. Now, because we have that issue with the billboard effect, we kind of need to rotate that towards it. So what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to disable the billboard effect so I can simply place this as I want. So let's go to my path here and let's change the orientation of these to be kind of like this, and this one to be on the Y plane. So you're going to see what effects we want. The next thing we want to do is to align this to the velocity we want. So on the particle material, let's go to on the spawn, and I believe it's position velocity. There we go. Let's change the position to, as the other one suggests, to -1. And here, what you want to do on the particle flags is to align towards Y. And this should take care of us aligning back to where we want. Now it's simply a matter of us, I believe we can reverse and flip the faces to correct the UV. No. Okay, that was the case. So it's by using rotate. Yeah. So this is how you're going to align the particles to where you want. Oh no, of course, I'm forgetting something here. The initial minimum velocity here we're going to use to align it. And I think this should work because whenever we align, we want to align towards the velocity. And we also want to disable spread. There we go. That was how I did it. So you have to do a lot of experimentations with particle. This is the set of tools that the engine gave you, and through experimentation, you have to fix the problems you find and find solutions to the others you don't. So now it's just a matter of setting it up. And there you go. That is the direction we want. Next thing, you want to take care of the position of it. I want to place right under the mech here. And we are going to fix the issue with the billboards effect in just a second. This is basically what I did with the other one when I did with the in-house objects and resources of Godot. So now that we have done that, we want to strip away the parts of the code that does not do what we want. So let's enable back the particle billboard effects. And we have now the effect we want, but we do not want the billboard effect. So how are you going to fix that? Well, one of the ways that I found is, let's duplicate this. And let's go towards our geometry and let's duplicate our material override. And let's duplicate it recursively to just make sure we're not editing the first material of the one. So the way that we have done this is, after you have built the material you want, and there are things inside of this material that you want to replicate or edit through a custom shader editor. So what we want to do is to convert this to a shader material so we can access everything we did with the standard shader as code. And through code, you can actually edit the shader. Now, because you have done this shader using the standard one, there's going to be a lot of things that you're not going to need, and this will be up to you to edit. And this requires some shader experience to fix it. But I will be providing a shader code for you to use it if you want it. So the one I'm using for this one, you're going to be able to download it as always on the GodotShaders.com and on the itchio page as well. So the part of the code that does the billboard effect is this one right here. And if we delete this, you should be able to see that we no longer have the billboard effect, but because we have enabled the particle billboard effect, we have that animation swapping of the frame index for the texture, so it grabs different textures. So if I reduce that blinking, you can actually see it. So you're going to see that it's actually switching textures. So that is the effect we want for this one. So let's place it under the right position we want. And there we go. We basically have finished the muzzle flash effect. Now all that remains is for us to use the same material. So let's go ahead, let's copy the material we want, and we are going to be overriding this material. You can create a copy in the background or save this, just so you can keep a backup if you want to go back. So let's go ahead, and this is not the material we want, this is the one. Let's paste it, and now basically we have the effect as we want. Now let me just copy the Z position here, so it's 0.28, so you can have on the same reference right there. So there we go. Now it's just a matter of aligning through your assets, particles, and only using free assets and Godot on particle system, we have created our muzzle flash fire effect. Now the last thing is for us to fine-tune the smoke so we can match better our smoke effects. So let's go right ahead and let's adjust now the lifetime. So as you can see, by the rate that this is being fired upon, I think the particles can be a little faster. So something like this, I think it works a little better. Now under the scale menu, I think we can also adjust the scale of this. So let's go to scale, and I think I can reduce this to 0.9 and maybe 1.2 or something. So just we can have a little better variation here. And you can also always adjust your curve for the scale modification to take a little more time to become full size. And as always, adjust these as you need it. And there we go. That should be good enough. And if you wanted to increase or decrease your particle amount to match the effect you have, you can also adjust it right there. Now be mindful that unit scale is pretty much important with particles. So if my mech was smaller or bigger, the velocity of the effects is going to change. So If you will be changing the size of this particle effect, you're going to have to adjust all the scale properties, but also the velocity of the properties, because the velocity of the property influences the weight it is perceived. And as you can see, it has a completely different effect if we make it stand still. So depending on the effects you want to adjust the speed based on the reference size model you are using and stuff like that. But that is basically how I built the firing effect for my smoke one. And I think that for this one, the particles should be able to start a little smaller. I think this particle effect is a little too big for my taste. So this is just some final adjustments you can make towards your scaling and like fine tuning whenever it builds it. There you go. I think this looks a little better. And if you wanted, you can also adjust the opacity of the smoke, which is going to make quite a difference. And like something like this. And there we go. That's basically how it creates the same effect that I did there. And through that method that I showed you to converting a shader you created in Godot through the standard material 3D and converting it back to shader code is going to allow you to see how Godot does the effects you saw on the sturdy shading material. And basically, if you want to copy any part of the code of Godot that does that effect, like we did with customizing here the billboard effect for the shade of the particles, you can basically do it. So if you were curious of how Godot does the particle animations, this is how it does it. And one of the things you can do later, if you are an expert with shaders, is to basically optimize this. For instance, we are using particle animation loops. We can basically disable that if check. And by doing this, you're actually speeding up the shader to be more performant. So those type of optimizations in the end is going to make quite a change whenever you multiply the amount of assets you're using here by the amount of units there are inside of your game. So this is what I want to show you, how to create from scratch a muzzle flash effect using open source textures that you're going to use. And this is pretty much how I built my own fire effect for my mech here. And I think it works pretty much all right. And you want to use a bone attachment to hook up the smoke effect to follow a single bone of your mesh, which in that case, it's following the upper torso of my mech. And through the animation is going to stick with it. And also something I think I'm going to need to change here is for the coordinates of the smoke. I think that they are at the moment global. So let me see. No, so they are actually the way you want them. You want them to be emitting through the world. Now the muzzle flash effect, you kind of want to follow the mech. So you're going to go right ahead on the processing material. I don't remember where it is. It's regarding spawning. So it's going to be drawing. There we go. So you want to enable this thing right here. If you enable this, so let me just increase the particle lifetime speed so you can actually see what I mean. There we go. So if I move this, you're going to see that the muzzle flash is not actually following the object. We don't want it to be left behind. This type of effect, we want to stay put with the mech. So what you want to do is on the processing material, rather on the GPU particle emitting nodes on drawing, you want to use local coordinates. What this is going to do is to stick the particles to follow the coordinates of this object, which is what we want, because in the case of the muzzle flash effect, whenever we move our mech, we kind of want it to move with it. So you want to enable local coordinates for that. So let me just go back here to where it was. And that should take care of it. Now, regarding the smoke effect, you want to, whenever the mech moves, to also inherently move the smoke forwards. So whenever your mech is moving throughout the world, it's going to have a velocity, and we want to apply that velocity over the smoke. So the smoke does not clip through the mech and it's going to look kind of weird. So the way that you can do that is, let me see if I can find a smoke. There's a property now under the particles inside the processing material of the particles called inherent velocity ratio. And this is the inherent velocity by each particle when spawning. And you want to put this on the maximum because whenever the mech moves, you want to apply that velocity towards the particle system. And you do not want the particle to be lagging behind it to clip through the mech. This will not be apparent if your unit is moving slowly, but if you have a fast moving object, this is going to save your ass and it's going to inherit the velocity of the object through the particle and it's going to make it look much nicer. So there you go, guys. This is pretty much how you do the effects. If you want to take this a step further, you can introduce a custom mesh from Blender. So just the way that I did here with my mech. Let me try to Ctrl-Z where I unhided all of my mesh. And let me enable the file assets. If you want to improve performance, you basically are going to create this type of thing here. And you're going to use this custom mesh inside of Godot. In order to reduce the particle amounts you're going to be spawning, but also the draw passes is going to be required only one pass. So if you want to take this a step further, you're going to do that. So if I go here towards my weapon assets, you're going to see I'm only using 2 particle emitters here. These ones are work in progress tests. So for the muzzle flash effect, I'm actually using just a single pass, which has that custom mesh from Blender that I exported, which is basically 2 planes. Also, something you might have noticed, this orange box here actually represents the visibility of your particle system. So if you want to optimize your particle system under the particles, so you want to encompass only the particles as you see. This is going to be used to toggle the particle on or off, depending if it's visible on the screen or not. So you might want to adjust this as you see fit. So only allow this to encompass the particles you are emitting. This is going to improve performance as well. And do the same with the muzzle flash. And I'm actually just lazy, so let's leave it at that. So that's all I have for you guys in order to create your fire gun mechanism. And this is all I have for you. So that is how you can basically create a particle effect for Godot for your RTS mech. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and I'll see you on the next one.